Jasmine Carter took the translation job thinking it was legitimate business. Korean executives needed an interpreter for meetings in Chicago. Simple, professional, well paid. Then she walked into the conference room and realized the executives were Mafia, and the business meeting was planning a murder. She kept her face blank, translating their cover conversation perfectly. But Kang Min-seok, the boss, watched her with dark, knowing eyes. He knew she'd understood every word, and now she knew far too much to walk away alive. Jasmine Carter had been working as a professional Korean English translator and interpreter in Chicago for 3 years, ever since finishing her master's degree in Korean Studies and East Asian Languages from Northwestern University. She'd built a solid reputation in the Korean business community. Reliable, accurate, discreet, and one of the few black translators who spoke Korean at near native fluency. Her client list included legitimate Korean businesses operating in Chicago, import-export companies, restaurants, tech startups, real estate firms. She made good money, enjoyed her work, and had carved out a successful niche career for herself in a specialized field. So when she received a call from a new potential client requesting her services for a series of business meetings over the next week, she'd seen no reason to be suspicious or concerned. "We are Korean business group expanding operations in Chicago," the man had explained in accented English over the phone. "We need a professional translator for important meetings with American partners and internal strategy sessions. Your name came highly recommended by several people in the Korean business community. Pay is $2,000 per day, cash, for approximately 6 to 8 hours of work daily. Are you available starting Monday?" $2,000 per day was substantially higher than Jasmine's usual rate of $800 to $1,000 for a full day of translation work. But it wasn't unheard of for urgent, high-stakes business negotiations. And the man had mentioned her name coming recommended, which suggested he'd done his research and was willing to pay premium rates for quality work. "Can you tell me more about the nature of the meetings?" Jasmine had asked, following her standard practice of vetting potential clients before accepting jobs. "What industry are you in? What kind of translation will be required? Technical, legal, general business." "Import-export business, some real estate development, some restaurant and hospitality ventures. Mostly general business translation, strategy discussions, partnership negotiations, that kind of thing. Nothing too technical or specialized. We just need someone fluent in both Korean and English, who can accurately convey meaning in both directions and maintain complete confidentiality about business discussions. Can you do that?" "Yes, that's exactly what I do professionally. Confidentiality is always guaranteed. I sign NDAs regularly for clients. Can you send me the formal details by email? Company name, meeting location, schedule, and the NDA for my review?" "Of course. I send everything within 1 hour. Please review and let me know if terms are acceptable. We are hoping to start Monday morning at 9 a.m. The email had arrived exactly 1 hour later. The company was listed as Daehan Trading Corporation, with a business address in Chicago's Chinatown neighborhood. The NDA was standard, agreeing not to disclose any business information discussed during meetings, with severe financial and legal penalties for breach of confidentiality. The schedule showed meetings Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to approximately 5 or 6 p.m. each day at the company's offices. Payment would be in cash at the end of each day. Everything had looked legitimate and professional. Jasmine had signed the NDA, returned it by email, and confirmed her availability for the week starting Monday. That had been Friday afternoon. Now it was Monday morning at 8:45 a.m., and Jasmine was standing outside the address listed for Daehan Trading Corporation in Chinatown, looking at a nondescript 3-story brick building that looked more like a warehouse than corporate offices. The building was located on a quiet side street, not on one of the main commercial corridors. There were no visible business signs, no company name on the door, nothing that suggested this was actually a corporate office building. The windows were tinted dark, making it impossible to see inside. A security camera was prominently positioned above the unmarked steel door. Jasmine felt her first genuine twinge of unease. This didn't look like the offices of a legitimate import-export company. This looked like something else, something that probably wasn't entirely legal. She stood on the sidewalk debating whether to go inside or to call the contact number and cancel the job, claiming a sudden illness or family emergency. $2,000 a day was excellent money, but no amount of money was worth getting involved in something illegal or dangerous. Before she could make a decision, the steel door opened and a Korean man in his 30s stepped out. He was dressed in an expensive suit, had a visible scar on his left cheek, and carried himself with the kind of casual menace that immediately screamed, "Dangerous." "Miss Carter?" he said in Korean, his tone polite but his eyes cold and assessing. "We have been expecting you. Please come inside. Mr. Kang is ready to begin the meeting." Jasmine's Korean was fluent enough that she'd understood every word perfectly, including the subtle undertones in his phrasing that suggested this wasn't really a request, but a command. She also noticed he'd spoken in Korean rather than English, probably testing whether she was actually as fluent as her reputation suggested. "Yes, I'm Jasmine Carter," she replied in equally fluent Korean, keeping her voice professional and calm despite her growing unease. "Thank you for inviting me. I'm ready to work." "Good. Follow me, please. And Miss Carter, everything you see and hear in this building today is strictly confidential. The NDA you signed is legally binding, and we take violations very seriously. You understand this, yes?" "I understand completely. Confidentiality is always guaranteed in my work." She followed him inside, her heart rate picking up as the steel door closed behind her with an ominous, heavy clunk and an electronic lock engaged automatically. The interior of the building was nothing like a normal corporate office. The first floor was essentially one large open space with exposed brick walls, concrete floors, and minimal furniture. Several more Korean men in expensive suits were scattered around the space, some talking quietly in groups, others on their phones, all of them looking like exactly the kind of people you'd cross the street to avoid in a dark alley. This was not a legitimate business. Jasmine knew that with absolute certainty now. These were criminals, organized crime, probably the Korean Mafia based in Chicago. And she'd just walked into their headquarters and locked herself inside with them. "The conference room is upstairs," the scarred man said, gesturing toward a staircase at the back of the open space. "Mr. Kang and the other executives are waiting. Please go up. Second floor, first door on the right." Jasmine climbed the stairs on shaking legs, trying to figure out how to extract herself from this situation without making these dangerous men angry. Maybe she could claim she didn't feel well. Maybe she could say there was a family emergency. Maybe she could just do one day of translation work, collect her payment, and then refuse to return for the rest of the week. She reached the second floor and found the door the scarred man had indicated. She knocked lightly, and a deep male voice from inside called out in Korean, "Come in." Jasmine opened the door and stepped into a conference room that looked slightly more professional than the warehouse floor below. A large table surrounded by leather chairs, whiteboards on the walls, windows that were tinted dark from the outside but allowed those inside to see out. 6 Korean men sat around the table, all dressed in expensive suits, all watching her enter with expressions ranging from curious to coldly evaluative. but it was the man at the head of the table who immediately captured and held Jasmine's attention. He was probably in his late 30s, tall and powerfully built, with sharp, handsome features and dark eyes that seemed to see and analyze everything in a single glance. He radiated authority and danger in equal measure. This was clearly the boss, the person everyone else in the room deferred to. "Miss Carter," he said in English with a noticeable Korean accent, standing and gesturing to an empty chair near his position at the table. "Thank you for coming. I am Kang Min-seok, the head of Daehan Trading Corporation. These are my executives and senior advisors. Please sit. We have much business to discuss today, and we need your translation services." Jasmine sat in the indicated chair, setting her bag on the floor beside her and pulling out the notebook and pen she always brought to translation jobs for taking notes on technical terms or names. She tried to look professional and calm, tried to ignore the way her hands were shaking slightly. "Before we begin," Kang Min-seok continued in English, his dark eyes locked on her face with unsettling intensity, "I need to confirm something important. Your Korean is truly fluent, yes? Can you understand not just simple business conversations, but also complex, nuanced discussions, idioms, slang, technical terminology?" "Yes, my Korean is fluent at that level," Jasmine confirmed, wondering why he was asking so directly. Most clients just assumed her Korean was good, based on her reputation. They didn't test it so explicitly. "I spent 2 years studying at Yonsei University in Seoul as part of my graduate program. I can understand and translate complex, nuanced conversations accurately." "Excellent. That is exactly what we need. Very specialized, very specific discussions that require complete accuracy in translation." Something in the way he said it made Jasmine's skin prickle with fresh unease. "We will be having some conversations in Korean that need to be translated to English for certain associates, and some conversations in English that need to be translated to Korean. But there will also be some conversations in Korean that are not for translation, internal discussions among Korean speakers only. When we have those internal discussions, you simply remain silent and take no notes. You understand?" "I understand. You'll indicate when you need translation and when you're having internal discussions in Korean only." "Precisely. Let us begin." For the first 30 minutes, the meeting seemed relatively normal and legitimate, if somewhat vague on actual details. Kang Min-seok and his associates discussed their import-export business in general terms, talking about bringing Korean products into American markets, about distribution channels, and about partnerships with American companies. Jasmine translated back and forth as requested, and everything seemed like it could plausibly be an actual business discussion. But then Kang Min-seok switched abruptly to speaking in Korean and made a small hand gesture that Jasmine interpreted as indicating this was an internal discussion that she should not translate. "The situation with the Russians has escalated," he said in rapid, fluent Korean. "Viktor Dimitrov is refusing to honor our agreement about the South Side territory. He's moving his drug distribution into areas we clearly established as ours during the negotiations last month. This is a deliberate provocation designed to test whether we'll actually defend our boundaries or whether we'll accept encroachment." One of the other men responded, also in Korean, "We can't let this stand. If Viktor thinks we're weak enough to tolerate territory violations, every other organization in Chicago will start pushing into our operations. We need to respond with force. Clear, unmistakable force that sends a message." "I agree," another man said. "But we need to be strategic about how we respond. We can't just start a war with the Russians without considering how that affects our other relationships and operations." The Mexicans won't like it if we destabilize the current balance. The Italians will see it as an opportunity to expand their own territory while we're distracted fighting Viktor. Jasmine sat frozen in her chair, her pen hovering over her blank notebook, trying desperately to keep her expression neutral and uncomprehending even as her mind raced with the terrifying realization of what she was actually hearing. These men weren't businessmen. They were organized crime, the Korean Mafia operating in Chicago, discussing drug distribution and territory, and potential gang wars. And they were having this conversation in Korean right in front of her, because they'd told her these were internal discussions she shouldn't translate or take notes on. But they'd also asked very specifically if she was truly fluent in Korean, if she could understand complex, nuanced discussions, which meant they knew she could understand every single word they were saying. So why were they having this conversation in front of her? Kang Min-seok spoke again, his voice cold and controlled. We'll schedule a meeting with Viktor for this Friday night. Neutral location, the warehouse district near the river where we've done exchanges before. We'll tell him we want to discuss the territory issue and reach a new agreement. He'll bring minimal security because he'll think it's a genuine negotiation. And then we'll handle the problem permanently. You mean kill him? One of the men asked, seeking clarification. I mean, eliminate the threat to our operations in the most final way possible, Kang Min-seok said. Viktor has been a problem for months. This territory violation is just the latest in a series of provocations. It's time to remove him from the equation entirely and absorb his most valuable operations into ours. His brother Alexei is less aggressive and more amenable to cooperation. Once Viktor is gone, we can negotiate with Alexei from a position of strength. They were planning a murder. Right here in this conference room, right in front of Jasmine, speaking in Korean because they'd told her not to translate these internal discussions. They were planning to kill someone named Viktor Dimitrov, and they were discussing it openly like it was a normal business decision. Jasmine kept her face carefully blank, her eyes focused on her empty notebook as though she was patiently waiting for the next English conversation she'd need to translate. She tried to breathe normally, tried to keep her hands from shaking, tried to look like someone who understood absolutely nothing of what was being discussed. But when she risked a quick glance up at Kang Min-seok, she found him staring directly at her with those dark, penetrating eyes, watching her face carefully, studying her reaction. And she saw recognition flash across his features, a cold, knowing smile that told her he knew exactly what she'd understood. He knew she spoke Korean fluently. He knew she'd comprehended every single word of their murder planning. And he'd had the conversation in front of her deliberately, testing whether she'd maintain her professional discretion or whether she'd react in a way that proved she was a liability. Let's take a short break, Kang Min-seok said suddenly in English, still watching Jasmine with that unsettling, knowing expression. 15 minutes. Miss Carter, please come with me to my private office. I need to discuss some translation clarifications with you. This was it. This was where he'd confront her about understanding the Korean conversation. This was where things would get dangerous. Every instinct Jasmine had screamed at her to run, to refuse to go to his private office, to make an excuse about needing to leave immediately, to get out of this building and never come back. But she was trapped on the second floor of a warehouse filled with armed criminals, and running would only confirm that she was a threat who needed to be eliminated. So she stood up with her legs shaking, collected her bag, and followed Kang Min-seok down the hallway to another room that appeared to be his private office. He gestured for her to enter, then closed the door behind them with an ominous, quiet click. The office was larger and more luxurious than the conference room. Expensive furniture, original art on the walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the street below. Kang Min-seok walked to the windows and stood looking out at the city for a long moment before turning to face her directly. "You understood everything we discussed in that conference room," he said in Korean. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Every word of the conversation about Viktor Dimitrov and the plan for Friday night. I watched your face very carefully. You have excellent control. You barely reacted at all. But your breathing changed slightly when I mentioned killing Viktor. Your hand tightened on your pen. Your eyes widened for just a fraction of a second. You understood completely, even though you pretended not to. Jasmine's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it might burst through her chest. Lying seemed pointless. He clearly knew the truth. But admitting she'd understood could get her killed. "I understood some words," she said carefully in Korean, trying to find a middle ground. But the conversation was very fast and used some terms I wasn't completely familiar with. I understood you were discussing someone named Viktor in some kind of meeting on Friday, but the specific details were unclear to me. "Don't insult my intelligence by lying badly," Kang Min-seok said, his voice hardening. "You're an expert translator with near-native fluency who studied at Yonsei University for 2 years. You understood every single word perfectly. So let's not pretend otherwise. You know exactly what we're planning to do on Friday night. You know we're going to kill Viktor Dimitrov. You know far too much to simply walk out of here and go about your normal life. So the question becomes, what do we do about that problem?" "I signed an NDA," Jasmine said, her voice shaking despite her attempt to sound calm and professional. "Everything I hear during these meetings is strictly confidential. I would never violate that confidentiality. Never. I'm a professional translator. Discretion is absolutely fundamental to my work. You can trust that I won't say anything to anyone about what I heard today." Can I trust that? How can I possibly trust that? You're not part of our organization. You have no loyalty to me or to our operations. You're a civilian who accidentally stumbled into very dangerous knowledge. The safest thing, the logical thing, would be to eliminate you as a threat. You understand that, yes? You understand that letting you walk out of here alive, knowing what you know, is an enormous risk for my organization and me? "Please," Jasmine whispered, abandoning all pretense of calm professionalism. "Please don't kill me. I won't say anything, I promise. I'll sign anything you want. I'll do whatever you need to ensure my silence. Just please don't kill me." Kang Min-seok studied her face for a long, terrifying moment. "I believe you mean that right now. But intentions change. Fear fades. Once you're safely away from here, once the immediate danger has passed, you might convince yourself that going to the police is the right thing to do, that reporting a planned murder makes you a good person doing her civic duty. And then I and my entire operation would be compromised because I made the mistake of trusting a stranger. I won't go to the police, I swear. I'm not naive. I know what you are and what you do. Going to the police would just get me killed later as retaliation. I'm not going to do something that stupid. I just want to forget this ever happened and go back to my normal life. Please. You can't unknow what you know. That's the fundamental problem. The knowledge exists in your mind now and can't be removed. So I have 3 options. Kill you to permanently eliminate the threat. Hold you prisoner indefinitely to prevent you from sharing the information. Or let you go and hope you keep your promise of silence. None of these options are ideal from a risk management perspective. What if I worked for you? Jasmine heard herself say, desperation making her creative. not just as a translator for this week, but permanently, as part of your organization. That would give you control over me, the ability to monitor me, and assurance that I won't betray you because I'd be betraying myself. You said you need specialized translation services. I can provide that. And if I'm part of your organization, you can trust my silence because it would be in my own best interest to maintain it. Kang Min-seok's expression shifted slightly. Interest replaced some of the cold calculation. You're offering to permanently join a criminal organization that you accidentally discovered today? That's quite a leap from being a freelance translator serving legitimate businesses. I'm offering to save my own life by making myself valuable to you. You need someone who speaks both Korean and English fluently for your operations. I don't need to be killed for accidentally overhearing things I shouldn't have heard. We both benefit from an arrangement where I work for you exclusively, and you have control over my activities and my silence. It makes practical sense for both of us. It does make a certain strategic sense, Kang Min-seok admitted, walking toward his desk and sitting on the edge of it, his dark eyes never leaving her face. Having a skilled translator who's not ethnically Korean could actually be quite useful for certain operations where we need someone who doesn't look like an obvious Mafia associate. Your fluency in Korean, combined with your American appearance, creates interesting possibilities for information gathering and negotiations. But working for me means truly working for me, following my orders, maintaining absolute loyalty, understanding that betrayal results in severe consequences. Could you actually do that? Could you actually function in my world despite having no background in crime or violence? I can adapt. I'm smart and I learn quickly. And I'm very motivated to survive. That's powerful motivation. Yes, survival is an excellent motivator. Very well, Miss Carter. Here is my offer. You will work exclusively for my organization and me as our translator and, eventually, as I come to trust you in other capacities as well. You will be paid substantially, $5,000 per week to start, with increases as you prove your value. You will live in a secure apartment that I own, so I can monitor your activities and ensure your safety from my enemies and your own possible poor decisions. You will not contact the police, the FBI, or any law enforcement about anything you see or hear while working for me. You will maintain absolute confidentiality about my operations. You will be available whenever I need your services, day or night. Violation of any of these terms results in immediate and permanent termination. And by termination, I mean death, to be absolutely clear. Do you accept these terms? Jasmine felt like she was signing away her soul, but the alternative was immediate death. I accept. Then welcome to my organization, Miss Carter. You've just made the most important and dangerous decision of your life. I hope for your sake that you're as smart and adaptable as you claim to be, because this world doesn't forgive weakness or mistakes. Now come back to the conference room. We have more discussions to conduct, and you need to start learning how this organization actually operates. Over the following weeks, Jasmine's life transformed into something completely unrecognizable from the normal, safe existence she'd built in Chicago as a freelance translator. Kang Min-seok had been completely serious about every term of his offer. Within 2 days of that first terrifying meeting, she'd been moved out of her apartment in Lincoln Park into a luxury high-rise in River North that was owned by one of Min-seok's many shell corporations. The apartment was beautiful. Spacious 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, fully equipped kitchen, everything she could possibly need. But it was also clearly monitored, security cameras in the hallway, electronic locks that she suspected Min-seok could override remotely, the unmistakable sense that her movements were being tracked. She was paid exactly as promised. $5,000 in cash every Friday afternoon, handed to her in a plain envelope by Min-seok's second-in-command, a cold, scarred man named Park Ji-hoon, who seemed to perpetually disapprove of her presence in the organization. The money was extraordinary, more than she'd made in an entire month as a freelance translator. But it came with the constant awareness that she'd essentially sold herself into indentured servitude to a criminal organization and couldn't leave without being killed. Her work duties varied dramatically from day to day. Sometimes she translated legitimate business discussions. Min-seok did actually run several legal import-export companies and restaurant operations that served as fronts for money laundering. Sometimes she translated negotiations with other criminal organizations, tense meetings where one wrong word could trigger violence. Sometimes she simply listened to conversations in Korean and English and provided summaries and analysis to Min-seok afterward about what various people had said and what their true intentions might be. And sometimes, increasingly often, Min-seok would call her to his office just to talk. Not about business or translation work, but about her life, her background, her thoughts on various topics. He seemed genuinely curious about her, asking about growing up Black in America, about her decision to study Korean, about her family and her education and her career before this arrangement. These conversations made her deeply uncomfortable, because they suggested he saw her as more than just a useful tool, and that complication seemed dangerous. "Why did you choose to study Korean specifically?" he asked during one of these conversations, 3 weeks into her new employment. "It's not a common choice for Americans, especially not for Black Americans. What drew you to the language and culture?" "I took a Korean history class in college as an elective and found it fascinating," Jasmine explained, sitting in one of the expensive leather chairs across from his desk. The professor was Korean American and brought so much passion to teaching about Korean culture and history. The occupation by Japan, the Korean War, the division of the peninsula, the incredible economic development of South Korea from devastation to one of the world's most advanced economies in just a few decades. It was this amazing story of resilience and determination and transformation. I wanted to understand more, so I started studying the language. And then I fell in love with the language itself. The grammar structure, the honorific system, the way it reflected cultural values. By the time I graduated, I was fluent enough to pursue graduate studies in Korean language and culture. And your family supported this unusual choice. Black families in America often have very specific expectations for their children's education and careers, from what I understand. Becoming a Korean translator was probably not what they envisioned for you. My parents were skeptical at first. They wanted me to pursue something more practical and lucrative, like law or medicine or business. But they also raised me to follow my passions and to be intellectually curious about the world. So they supported my choice, even though they didn't entirely understand it. My mother used to joke that I was the only Black girl in Detroit who could discuss Korean history and recite Korean poetry, but couldn't cook collard greens properly. Min-seok smiled slightly, a rare expression that made him look younger and less dangerous. "Your mother sounds wise and supportive." My father was the opposite. He had very rigid ideas about what I should become and how I should live my life. When I deviated even slightly from his expectations, there were severe consequences. I learned early that conformity and obedience were survival strategies in my family. Is that how you ended up running a criminal organization? Family expectations and tradition? Partially. My father built this organization from nothing. He came to Chicago from Seoul 30 years ago with nothing except determination and willingness to do whatever necessary to survive and build power. He established the Korean Mafia presence in this city through ruthlessness and strategic violence. When he died 5 years ago, I inherited the organization and all the responsibilities and dangers that came with it. I could have walked away, theoretically. But walking away would have meant dishonoring everything he built and leaving a power vacuum that would have resulted in violent chaos as others fought to take control. So I stayed and took over, even though I'd hoped for a different life. What kind of different life did you want? Something quieter, less violent, maybe teaching or research. I studied economics and international business at university before my father's death forced me back into this world. I wanted to understand how economies develop and how to build sustainable prosperity. Instead, I build criminal enterprises and manage violence. It's ironic in a way that's not particularly funny. Jasmine found herself feeling an unexpected sympathy for him. This dangerous man who'd threatened to kill her, who still held her life in his hands, who ran an organization built on crime and violence. But he was also clearly a prisoner of his circumstances in his own way, trapped by family obligation and cultural expectation, just like she was now trapped in his organization. "We're both doing things we didn't choose," she observed quietly. "You're running a criminal empire you inherited. I'm working for that empire because I accidentally learned too much. Neither of us really chose this life. It was chosen for us by circumstances beyond our control. Perhaps. But we still make choices within those constraints. I choose how to run this organization. With more or less violence, more or less honor, more or less care for the people who work for me. You choose how to function within your role here, with resistance or acceptance, with competence or sabotage, with fear or adaptation. Our choices still matter, even when our overall situation is constrained." 4 weeks into her new employment, the situation with Viktor Dimitrov came to a head exactly as Min-seok had planned. Jasmine had hoped, desperately, naively, that the murder plot she'd overheard in that first meeting had been just talk, posturing, something that wouldn't actually happen. But on Friday evening, Min-seok called her to his office and informed her that she'd be accompanying him to the meeting with Viktor that night. "Why do you need me there?" Jasmine asked, her stomach dropping with dread. If you're doing what you discussed in that first meeting, why would you need a translator present?" "Because Viktor will bring people who speak only Russian. I'm bringing Park Ji-hoon, who speaks Korean and English, but not Russian. We'll need communication between our groups, and having you there provides that capability. Also, I want you to see how this world actually operates. You've been working for me for a month, but you've been sheltered from the actual violence that underlies everything. It's time you understood the reality of what you've agreed to be part of. I don't want to watch someone die. Please don't make me witness that. I'm not giving you a choice. You work for me now. You go where I tell you to go. You do what I tell you to do. That was the agreement that saved your life 4 weeks ago. So get dressed in dark, non-distinctive clothing and be ready to leave in 1 hour. And Jasmine, if you try to run, or if you try to warn Viktor, or if you do anything that compromises this operation, I will kill you myself. Personally, do you understand?" "I understand." She went back to her monitored apartment and changed into dark jeans and a black sweater with shaking hands, trying not to think about what she was about to witness. She'd never seen anyone die. She'd lived her entire life in the normal, legal world, where violence was something that happened to other people in distant places. And now she was about to watch a murder happen right in front of her, because she'd made the terrible mistake of taking a translation job without properly vetting the client. Min-seok picked her up at exactly the appointed time, driving a nondescript black sedan with tinted windows. Park Ji-hoon was already in the passenger seat, checking a handgun with the casual familiarity of someone who used weapons regularly. They drove in silence to the warehouse district near the Chicago River, an industrial area that was largely abandoned at night, perfect for the kind of meeting that couldn't happen in public spaces. They parked near a large warehouse, building that looked like it hadn't been used for legitimate business in years. "Stay close to me," Min-seok instructed as they got out of the car. "Don't speak unless I tell you to translate something. Don't react visibly to anything you see. Just stay calm and do your job. If you do that, you'll be fine. If you panic or do something stupid, you'll get yourself and possibly me killed. Understand?" "I understand." They entered the warehouse through a side door. Inside, the space was mostly empty, except for some old equipment and debris scattered around. Harsh fluorescent lights hung from the ceiling, creating stark shadows. And in the center of the space, 3 men waited. Viktor Dimitrov was immediately recognizable from Min-seok's description. A tall, broad Russian man in his mid-40s, with a scarred face and cold eyes. He had 2 other men with him, both armed, both looking like exactly the kind of people you'd bring to a potentially dangerous meeting. "Kang?" Viktor said in heavily accented English. "You said you wanted to discuss the territory situation. So let's discuss. You make proposal, I consider. We reach agreement. Simple. I appreciate you coming to meet." Min-seok replied in English, his voice calm and controlled. "I think we can resolve this situation peacefully and reasonably. But first, I have some questions about your recent activities in the South Side area. My people tell me you've been moving drugs through territory we explicitly agreed was ours during our negotiations last month. I want to understand your reasoning for that decision. Your territory?" Viktor laughed harshly. "You think you own territory in Chicago? Nobody owns territory. We take what we can take and hold what we can hold. If you can't defend your operations, then they're not really yours, are they?" The conversation continued in this vein for several minutes. Min-seok calmly pressing for explanations, Viktor becoming increasingly aggressive and dismissive. The tension in the warehouse ratcheting higher and higher. Jasmine stood slightly behind Min-seok, translating nothing because the conversation was entirely in English. Watching this powder keg situation escalate toward inevitable violence. Then Min-seok made a subtle hand gesture that Jasmine didn't immediately understand. Everything happened so fast, she could barely process it. Park Ji-hoon pulled his gun and shot one of Viktor's men in the head before anyone could react. Min-seok drew a weapon she hadn't realized he was carrying and shot the other bodyguard twice in the chest. Viktor reached for his own gun, but Min-seok was faster, shooting him in the shoulder to disable his gun arm. Viktor fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder, screaming in Russian what Jasmine assumed were curses and threats. Min-seok walked over to him calmly, pressed the gun against Viktor's forehead, and said in English, "You were warned multiple times to respect our territory agreements. You chose to ignore those warnings. This is the consequence of that choice." He pulled the trigger. Viktor's body fell backward onto the concrete floor, blood pooling around his head. Jasmine turned and vomited violently, her entire body shaking, unable to process what she'd just witnessed. She'd just watched 3 men die in front of her. She'd watched Min-seok, the man she'd been having philosophical conversations with, the man who'd shared details about his life and actually listened to hers, casually execute someone like it was a routine business transaction. "Clean yourself up," Min-seok said, his voice still calm and controlled like he hadn't just committed 3 murders. We need to leave before anyone reports the gunshots. Ji-hoon will handle the bodies and clean up. You're coming back with me." The drive back to her apartment was silent. Jasmine sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, trying not to cry, trying not to think about the image of Viktor's head exploding that was seared into her brain forever. "You're in shock," Min-seok observed clinically when they arrived at her building. "That's normal for your first exposure to violence. Come up to your apartment. I'm not leaving you alone when you're in this state." He followed her up to her apartment, locked the door behind them, and guided her to the couch. He disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a glass of water that he pressed into her shaking hands. "Drink this. Slowly. Focus on breathing." "You killed him," Jasmine whispered, her voice breaking. "You shot him in the head right in front of me. You killed 3 people like it was nothing. Like they were just obstacles to remove." They were obstacles. Viktor was a threat to my organization and to my people. His bodyguards were collateral damage. Unfortunate, but necessary. In my world, you eliminate threats before they eliminate you. That's survival. That's what I do. You talked about wanting a different life, about studying economics and teaching, about being trapped in this world by family obligation. But you just murdered 3 people without hesitation or remorse. You're not trapped. You're exactly where you want to be, powerful and violent and in control. You choose this. I choose to survive. I choose to protect my organization and the people who depend on me for their livelihoods. Viktor would have killed me eventually if I hadn't killed him first. That's not a moral choice. It's a practical reality. You're judging me from the perspective of someone who's lived her entire life in the safe, legal world where violence is abstract and theoretical. But I live in a world where violence is constant and real, and the only choice is between being the person who acts first or the person who dies. I choose to live. I'm not apologizing for that. I can't do this. I can't be part of this. I don't know what I thought. That working for you would be translation and business meetings and staying out of the actual violence. But you just made me witness murder. You made me complicit. I can't do this. You don't have a choice anymore. You've seen too much. You know too much. The only reason you're still alive right now is because you're useful to me, and because I've decided to let you live. But if you become more trouble than you're worth, that calculation changes very quickly. So you're going to calm down, you're going to process what you saw tonight, and you're going to continue working for me. Those are your only options. Accept that reality or I'll remove you as a liability the same way I removed Viktor. He left her alone in the apartment after that, and Jasmine spent the rest of the night curled up on her couch, crying and shaking and trying to figure out how her life had gone so completely, catastrophically wrong in just 1 month. The next morning, Min-seok called her early. 7 a.m., far earlier than he usually required her presence. "Come to my office immediately. We need to talk." She arrived at the warehouse headquarters 30 minutes later, exhausted from not sleeping, her eyes red from crying all night. Min-seok was in his private office, sitting behind his desk, looking like he'd also had a rough night despite his usual perfect control. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the familiar chair across from his desk. She sat waiting for him to tell her she was being eliminated as a liability, preparing herself mentally for death. "I was too harsh with you last night," Min-seok said instead, surprising her completely. "You just witnessed your first exposure to real violence, and I responded to your shock and trauma with threats and coldness. That was wrong. You deserved. Not kindness exactly, but at least acknowledgement that what you experienced was genuinely traumatic and that your reaction was completely reasonable. So I'm apologizing. I'm sorry for forcing you to witness that without better preparation. And I'm sorry for threatening you when you were clearly in shock. Jasmine stared at him in disbelief. You're apologizing? You murdered 3 people last night and you're apologizing for being mean to me afterward? I'm not apologizing for doing what was necessary to protect my organization. I'm apologizing for how I handled your psychological response to witnessing it. There's a difference. I can't change what I am or what I do. I'm a criminal who sometimes has to use violence to survive in this world. But I can try to be less cruel about how I manage the people who work for me, especially when those people didn't choose this life voluntarily the way my other associates did. Why do you care? Why does it matter to you how I feel about any of this? I'm just a translator you're keeping alive because I'm useful. Why waste time apologizing or trying to make me feel better? Because you're right that I'm trapped in this life by circumstances and choices I made years ago. But that doesn't mean everyone around me has to be equally trapped and miserable. You're here because of my decision to let you live instead of killing you when you overheard too much. That makes your well-being my responsibility in some sense. I can't change the overall situation. You're still bound to my organization, and you'll still have to witness things you'd prefer not to see. But I can try to make it less traumatic and dehumanizing than it has to be. That's the least I can do, I suppose. I don't understand you. You're capable of coldly executing people. But you also care about whether your forced translator is psychologically traumatized? Those things don't go together. You're a contradiction. I'm a human being living in an inhuman world. Sometimes that creates contradictions. I learned violence and ruthlessness from my father, but I also learned from my mother, who died when I was 12, about compassion and responsibility for people weaker than yourself. Both those teachings exist in me simultaneously. I can be ruthless to my enemies and protective of my people at the same time. You're one of my people now, even though you didn't choose to be. So I'm protective of you, even while I'm forcing you to participate in things you find morally repugnant. It's contradictory, but that's who I am. Despite everything, despite the horror of last night, despite her forced employment, despite the fundamental wrongness of this entire situation, Jasmine found herself unable to completely hate Kang Min-seok. He was a murderer and a criminal and had destroyed her normal life. But he was also trying, in his own limited way, to be less terrible than he could be. And that minimal decency somehow made him more human and more sympathetic than if he'd been just pure evil. I don't forgive you for forcing me into this life, she said quietly. I don't forgive you for making me watch people die. But I appreciate the apology. It's more than I expected from you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just trying to make an impossible situation slightly less unbearable for both of us. Over the following months, Jasmine's relationship with Min-seok evolved in ways neither of them had anticipated or planned. She continued working as his translator and increasingly as his advisor on various matters where her American perspective and education were valuable. She witnessed more violence, not murders like that first horrible night, but beatings, intimidation, tense negotiations that could have turned violent at any moment. She became desensitized to it gradually, learned to function in Min-seok's world without constant fear and revulsion. She adapted, just as he'd said she would have to. But she also saw more of his human side, the part that existed underneath the cold criminal exterior. He'd share meals with her, casual dinners where they'd talk about everything except crime and violence. He'd ask her opinion on books and movies and music. He'd tell her stories about his childhood in Seoul, about his mother who died too young, about the weight of family expectations that had shaped his entire life. He'd even smile occasionally. Genuine smiles that transformed his face from dangerous to almost warm. And Jasmine found herself responding to that humanity, despite knowing she shouldn't. She'd catch herself looking forward to their conversations. She'd notice when he looked tired or stressed and find herself wanting to help somehow. She'd watch him work, seeing the intelligence and strategic thinking he brought to managing his complex organization, and feel something disturbingly close to admiration. "I think I'm developing Stockholm Syndrome," she admitted to him one evening, 6 months into her forced employment. They were in his office late after everyone else had left, sharing expensive whiskey that Min-seok had poured for both of them. "I'm starting to actually like you despite the fact that you're holding me prisoner and forcing me to participate in criminal activities. That's textbook Stockholm Syndrome. Or you're recognizing that I'm a complex human being rather than just a one-dimensional villain," Min-seok suggested. "Yes, I'm a criminal who's forced you into this life. But I'm also someone who respects your intelligence, values your opinions, tries to make your situation as tolerable as possible within the constraints of what I can offer." Both those things are true simultaneously. Acknowledging my humanity doesn't negate my crimes. It just means you're seeing the complete picture. The complete picture is still someone who murders people and runs a criminal empire built on violence and exploitation. Yes, that's absolutely true. I'm not a good person by any conventional moral standard. But I'm also not the worst person in this world. I have codes I follow. I don't harm innocent civilians. I don't tolerate human trafficking or exploitation of children within my territory. I try to minimize collateral damage when violence is necessary. I'm not asking you to think I'm good. I'm just asking you to see me completely. The violence and the humanity, the ruthlessness and the occasional kindness, the monster and the man. Can you do that? I'm already doing that. That's why I think I'm developing Stockholm Syndrome. Because I see both sides of you and I'm starting to care about the human side despite knowing better. And if you care about me, is that such a terrible thing? Doesn't caring about another person, even a deeply flawed one, make you more human rather than less? Doesn't maintaining your capacity for connection and empathy matter, even when the object of that empathy doesn't deserve it? You're very good at rationalizing morally questionable situations. I've had years of practice. It's necessary when your entire life exists in moral gray areas. 8 months into her forced employment, something happened that changed the fundamental dynamic between Jasmine and Min-seok. A rival organization, the Mexican cartel that controlled drug distribution in several Chicago neighborhoods, kidnapped Jasmine as leverage to force Min-seok to give up some of his territory and operations. She'd been walking home from a Korean language bookstore she'd started frequenting, one of the few small freedoms Min-seok allowed her, when 3 men grabbed her off the street, forced her into a van, and drove her to an abandoned building in a part of Chicago she didn't recognize. They tied her to a chair in a basement room and left her there for hours, periodically coming down to inform her that they'd contacted Min-seok and were negotiating her release in exchange for his withdrawal from certain territories. She was terrified, but tried to stay calm. Tried to remember that she was valuable enough that they probably wouldn't kill her as long as Min-seok cooperated with their demands. But as hours turned into a full day, as she sat tied to that chair without food or water or bathroom access, she started to genuinely fear that something had gone wrong with the negotiations. And these men would eventually decide she was more useful as a corpse sent as a message than as a living hostage. Then, in the middle of the night, she'd lost track of exactly how long she'd been captive. Maybe 20 hours. She heard gunfire upstairs. Lots of gunfire. Shouting in Spanish and Korean. Running footsteps. More gunfire. Then silence. The basement door burst open, and Min-seok appeared, gun in hand, his expensive suit torn and blood-stained, his face showing more raw emotion than she'd ever seen from him. Rage and fear and desperate relief all mixed together. "Jasmine," he said, rushing to her and cutting the ropes binding her to the chair with a knife he pulled from his jacket. "Are you hurt? Did they harm you?" "I'm okay. Scared, but okay. They didn't hurt me. They just kept me tied up down here." "What happened upstairs?" "I killed them. All of them. Everyone who was holding you. The entire cell of cartel members who thought they could take what's mine and use it as leverage against me. I made it very clear that it was an extremely poor decision. Can you stand? Can you walk?" She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her after being tied to the chair for so long. Min-seok caught her before she fell, lifting her into his arms like she weighed nothing, carrying her out of that nightmare basement and up through the house where the bodies of the men who'd kidnapped her lay scattered throughout. "Don't look," he said quietly, adjusting how he held her, so her face was pressed against his shoulder, blocking her view of the carnage he'd created to rescue her. "Just don't look. I'll get you out of here and somewhere safe." He carried her to his car, settled her carefully in the passenger seat, and drove directly to his own private home. Not the warehouse headquarters, but a penthouse apartment in a luxury building that she'd never seen before. "Why are we here?" she asked as he carried her from the car to the building elevator. "Why not go back to my apartment?" "Because your apartment was compromised. They knew where you lived, knew your routines, knew how to take you. That location isn't safe anymore. You'll stay here with me until I've eliminated the rest of the cartel presence in Chicago and secured our territory completely. This building has the best security in the city. No one gets to you here without going through me first." He carried her into the penthouse, a massive, beautiful space that was somehow both luxurious and comfortable, decorated with expensive art and furniture, but also books and personal items that made it feel like an actual home rather than just a display of wealth. He set her down carefully on a large couch and disappeared into another room, returning with a first aid kit and bottles of water. "Drink this slowly. I need to check you for injuries. You said they didn't hurt you, but I want to make sure." He examined her with surprising gentleness, checking her wrists where the ropes had cut into her skin, treating the minor abrasions with antiseptic and bandages, making sure she hadn't been harmed in ways she hadn't mentioned. His hands were steady and careful, completely different from the violent hands that had just killed multiple people to rescue her. "Why did you come for me yourself?" Jasmine asked as he worked. "You're the boss. You have people who handle things like rescues and retaliation. Why risk yourself personally?" "Because they took you. They took something that belongs to me, someone who's under my protection. That's not something I delegate to subordinates. That's something I handle personally to send a message about the consequences of touching my people. Also, I couldn't come for you. The thought of you being held by those animals, hurt or scared or thinking I might not come, I couldn't tolerate it. I had to get you myself. I'm not just a valuable asset to you anymore, am I? I've become something more. Something personal." Min-seok was quiet for a long moment, his hand stilling on her wrist. "No, you're not just an asset anymore. You haven't been for months. You've become important to me, in ways I didn't anticipate and don't fully know how to handle. You're brilliant and resilient, and you challenge me intellectually in ways no one else in my life does. You see both the monster and the man, and somehow you don't completely hate either version. You've become essential to me, Jasmine, not because you're useful, but because I care about you. Genuinely, deeply care about you in ways that terrify me, because caring about people in my world makes them targets. Which is exactly what happened when the cartel figured out you'd become important to me. So this is your fault? I got kidnapped because you started caring about me. Yes, it's completely my fault. You became a target because I failed to hide how much you mattered to me. My enemies saw a vulnerability they could exploit. That's on me, not you. And I'm sorry. Both for putting you in danger and for caring about you when I should have maintained professional distance. But I can't seem to help it. You've gotten under my skin in ways I don't know how to reverse or control. Jasmine looked at this powerful, dangerous man, sitting beside her on his couch, carefully bandaging her wrists with gentle hands, admitting that he cared about her in ways that made him vulnerable. And she realized that somewhere along the way, despite the violence and the forced employment and all the very valid reasons she should hate him, she'd fallen for him too. I care about you too, she admitted quietly. I know I shouldn't. I know it's probably just Stockholm syndrome or trauma bonding or some psychological adaptation to captivity. But I think about you constantly. I look forward to our conversations. I worry about you when you're dealing with dangerous situations. I miss you when you're gone. I've fallen in love with you, Min-seok. And I don't know what to do about that because this whole situation is so fundamentally wrong and unhealthy. It is wrong and unhealthy, Min-seok agreed. I'm a criminal who forced you into my world by threatening to kill you. That's not a foundation for a healthy relationship, but it's also genuine. These feelings we have for each other. They're real, even if the circumstances that created them were forced and traumatic. So maybe we're both slightly insane. But I want to try. I want to see if this thing between us can become something real despite how it started. Would you be willing to try that with me? I don't know if I'm willing or if I'm just too broken and dependent to refuse. But yes, I want to try. I want to see if we can build something genuine despite everything that's wrong about this situation. Min-seok leaned forward and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper, with all the pent-up emotion and desire that had been building between them for months. Jasmine kissed him back, wrapping her arms around him, letting herself fall completely into this impossible, dangerous, unhealthy relationship with a man who destroyed her old life, but somehow become essential to her new one. Over the following year, their relationship evolved from forced employment to genuine partnership in ways that surprised both of them. Min-seok continued running his criminal empire, but he increasingly involved Jasmine in strategic decisions beyond just translation. He valued her perspective, her American education and different cultural background, giving her insights that his Korean associates often missed. She became his most trusted advisor, the person he consulted on major decisions, the person whose opinion actually influenced his choices. And their personal relationship deepened in parallel with their professional partnership. They moved in together, officially, Jasmine abandoning the monitor department and living full-time in Min-seok's penthouse. They were careful to keep their relationship private from most of his organization, maintaining professional distance in public to avoid creating jealousy or resentment among his other associates. But in private, they were genuinely together, learning each other's habits and preferences, navigating conflicts and compromises. building something that felt increasingly real and solid. "Do you still feel like a prisoner?" Min-seok asked one evening, a year and a half after Jasmine's initial forced recruitment. They were having dinner together in the penthouse. A quiet domestic evening that felt remarkably normal, despite the underlying reality of their situation. "Sometimes," Jasmine admitted honestly. "I still can't just leave. I still can't go back to my old life or my old career. I'm still bound to you and your organization in ways that aren't fully consensual. But I don't want to leave anymore. If you gave me the choice tomorrow to walk away completely, to return to my old life with full protection and no consequences, I don't think I would take it. This life with you, as complicated and morally compromised as it is, has become my life. I've chosen it. Or at least, I've chosen you. So maybe I'm not really a prisoner anymore. Maybe I'm just someone who's made peace with staying in a situation that started as captivity, but became something else. I want to give you that choice," Min-seok said suddenly. "Officially, formally. I want to tell you that you're free to leave, if that's what you want. That you're not bound to me or my organization anymore, except by your own choice to stay. Would you believe me if I said that? Would you believe the choice was real? I don't know. After a year and a half of knowing that leaving means death, it's hard to suddenly believe that the threat is gone. How would I know you meant it? You wouldn't know for certain. You'd have to trust me. Trust that I love you enough to let you go if staying is making you miserable. Trust that I want you here by choice, rather than by coercion. I can't prove it to you. I can only tell you it's true and hope you believe me. Say it then, out loud. Give me the choice officially. Jasmine, you're free to leave my organization and my life if that's what you want. I'll provide you with protection, a new identity if necessary, and financial support to start over somewhere far from Chicago, where my enemies can't find you. I'll let you go completely, with no retaliation and no consequences. You just have to tell me that's what you want. Or you can stay, not because you're forced to, but because you choose to build a life with me despite all the complications. The choice is completely yours. What do you want?" Jasmine looked at this man, who'd threatened to kill her 18 months ago, who'd forced her into his criminal world, who'd become the most important person in her life somewhere along the way. "I choose to stay. Not because I'm afraid of what happens if I leave, but because I love you, and I want to see where this goes. I choose you, Min-seok, freely, completely. I choose this life we're building together. Even knowing what I am and what I do, even knowing all of that, I'm not naive about your world anymore. I know exactly what you are and what you're capable of, and I'm choosing you anyway. That's what love is sometimes. Choosing someone despite knowing all their flaws and failings. Choosing to build something together despite all the reasons it shouldn't work." 3 years after Jasmine had accidentally overheard a murder plot and been forced into Min-seok's organization, they were married in a small, private ceremony attended only by Min-seok's most trusted associates and Jasmine's family, who'd flown in from the U.S. and had no idea their daughter had been working for a criminal organization, believing instead the cover story that she'd fallen in love with a successful Korean businessman. "I know this started in the worst possible way," Min-seok said during his vows, speaking in English for Jasmine's family, but with the emotion and sincerity that needed no translation. "I forced you into my life by threatening you when you learned things you shouldn't have known. I gave you no choice about staying. I made you witness violence and participate in activities you found morally reprehensible. I did everything wrong that it's possible to do wrong at the start of a relationship. But somehow, despite all my failures and mistakes, you saw something worth loving in me. You challenged me to be better than I was. You made me want to become someone worthy of being loved by someone as remarkable as you. You chose to stay when I finally gave you the freedom to leave. That choice, that free, conscious choice to build a life with me, despite everything, is the most valuable thing anyone has ever given me. So I vow to spend the rest of our lives together honoring that choice. To be worthy of your love. To protect you and cherish you and try every day to be the partner you deserve rather than the criminal who threatened you into compliance. I love you, Jasmine. Thank you for choosing me. I know you're dangerous, Jasmine said during her own vows, speaking in Korean that her family wouldn't understand, but that Min-seok's associates would. I know what you do and what you're capable of. I've witnessed things I wish I could forget. I've been part of activities that compromised everything I used to believe about right and wrong. But I've also seen your humanity. The part of you that's trapped between the man you want to be and the criminal your circumstances forced you to become. I've seen how you care for your people, how you try to minimize harm when violence is necessary, how you carry the weight of your choices and responsibilities. I've fallen in love with both versions of you. The dangerous Mafia boss and the thoughtful, intelligent man who reads economics books and talks about building sustainable prosperity. Both those people exist in you simultaneously, and I love all of it. So I vow to stand beside you in this complicated, morally gray life we're building together. To be your partner in everything, the legitimate businesses and the criminal empire, the violence and the attempts at redemption. To love you completely, despite knowing exactly who and what you are. I choose you, Min-seok, freely, forever. 5 years after that first terrifying meeting where Jasmine had realized she'd accidentally walked into a Mafia planning session, she and Min-seok had built something neither of them had imagined possible at the start. Min-seok was still a criminal. He ran a powerful organization built on illegal activities and occasional violence. But he'd also gradually transitioned more operations to legitimate businesses, reducing the most violent aspects of his empire while maintaining the power and wealth that protected his people. He'd become someone who used his criminal foundation to build legal enterprises rather than just someone who profited from crime for its own sake. And Jasmine had become his true equal partner, not just a forced translator or reluctant participant, but someone who helped shape strategy, advised on major decisions, and shared equally in building their future. She'd also reconnected with her old life. Slowly, carefully, rebuilding relationships with family and friends by explaining that she'd fallen in love and moved to Chicago to be with her husband, who ran international businesses. Not exactly lies, but not exactly truth either. The kind of carefully constructed partial truths that allowed her to maintain connection to her old world while living fully in her new one. Do you ever regret it? Min-seok asked one evening as they sat together in their penthouse overlooking Chicago's lights. Their daughter, 3 years old, bilingual in Korean and English, was sleeping peacefully in the next room. Do you ever wish you'd just refused that first translation job and none of this had ever happened? I regret the fear and the trauma of those first months. I regret the violence I've witnessed. I regret the moral compromises I've had to make. But I don't regret you. I don't regret our family. I don't regret the life we've built together, despite its fundamental wrongness. This isn't the life I would have chosen if I'd had complete freedom of choice. But it's become my life, and I've chosen to embrace it rather than just endure it. So no, I don't regret it. I regret how it started, but not where we've ended up. I love you for choosing me when you could have chosen safety and normalcy, for seeing my humanity when I'd almost forgotten I had any, for building this life with me despite every reason not to. You saved me, Jasmine, from loneliness, from becoming completely consumed by violence and darkness, from forgetting that I'm more than just a criminal surviving in a brutal world. You saved me too, from a normal, safe, boring life, where I never really challenged myself or took risks or discovered what I was actually capable of. From never knowing what it felt like to be loved this completely, despite being known this thoroughly. We saved each other, even though the circumstances were terrible and wrong. Sometimes the most important relationships start in the worst possible ways. 7 years after Jasmine had overheard a murder plot and been forced into a criminal organization to save her own life, she was standing in a conference room very similar to the one where it had all started. But this time, she wasn't a terrified translator hoping to survive. She was Min-seok's equal partner, co-running their increasingly legitimate business empire, respected by everyone in the organization. "We've come full circle," she observed to Min-seok as they prepared for a meeting with potential investors in one of their legal import-export operations. 7 years ago, I was sitting in a room like this, terrified for my life, translating conversations and hoping you wouldn't kill me for understanding too much. Now I'm co-chairing the meeting, and you're introducing me as your wife and business partner. It's surreal. It's growth. It's what happens when two people choose each other, despite impossible circumstances, and decide to build something better than what they started with. I'm proud of what we've built together, Jasmine. Both the businesses and the family and the relationship that survived despite starting in the worst possible way. I'm proud of us too. We took something that should have destroyed us and turned it into something worth keeping. That's everything. That's the whole point. Taking broken pieces and building something beautiful. Starting with threats and coercion and violence, and somehow ending with love and partnership and family. We did that together. Against all odds, we did that. The investors arrived, and Jasmine and Min-seok slipped seamlessly into their professional roles. Two successful business people discussing legitimate opportunities, presenting financial projections and growth strategies, giving no indication of the criminal origins that had funded this legitimate empire, or the forced beginning that had become genuine love. Sometimes the most important transformations happened in the spaces between violence and peace, between coercion and choice, between the life you were forced into and the life you chose to build from those forced circumstances. Jasmine had been forced into Min-seok's world by circumstances beyond her control. But she'd chosen to stay, chosen to build, chosen to love. And that choice, that conscious, free choice to embrace a complicated, morally ambiguous life with a dangerous man, had made all the difference. Because in the end, love wasn't about perfect circumstances or moral clarity or relationships that started in socially acceptable ways. Sometimes love was about choosing someone despite knowing exactly who they were and what they'd done. Sometimes love was about building something beautiful from broken, terrible beginnings. Sometimes love was about transformation and growth, and two people saving each other from loneliness and darkness. And sometimes, just sometimes, love started with understanding a language you weren't supposed to speak, in a conversation you were never meant to comprehend, and choosing to survive long enough to discover that your captor could become your partner and your forced employment could become your chosen life. All because Jasmine Carter had taken a translation job, understood a murder plot, and somehow lived long enough to fall in love with a dangerous man who'd known she understood everything.